You can't tell me you don't see that. No, that. You got to look a little bit closer. And get a little bit closer. Like, you can't see that? Like, all that texture I did. Now, look closer. That texture. Yeah, and that ain't going to cut it. Hey everybody, welcome back to I'm going through puberty again. Let's try that one more time. Welcome back to Building Steam. I'm Brian Fadrosh of Brian Fadrosh Designs. Today we're going to give you a quick update on some work that I had gotten done on Bruce, better known as the Lord of Blades. Before I get into the whole issue that I had over the weekend, if you're enjoying what Sheila and I are doing here on the channel, by all means, please make sure that you are liking and subscribing to the videos. I know there's a bell icon somewhere. If you click on that, it'll let you know when we're dropping videos. We try to do one a week. And if there's something specific that you'd like to see either myself specifically cover as far as foamsmithing goes, something you'd like to see Sheila doing as far as fabric arts go, or what's always a great time to watch, the two of us talking together about something, by all means, leave us a comment down below. We would absolutely love to hear from you. But with having a 3-day weekend, I decided to start working on the color scheme and texture scheme for Bruce. And as you can tell from the intro, things didn't exactly go as well as I would have liked them to this weekend. With that being the case, I wanted to do two things with this video. First, I wanted to show you the steps that I took to enhance the texture that I already laid down, because again, just quite wasn't what I wanted it to be. So I wanted to go over the steps that I took to fix that. And secondly, I have some suggestions as to what you can do when you're running into the same sort of problem. So let's get to the texture. I had originally added texture by heating up the foam and pressing balled up tinfoil into it. Since I already added Plasti Dip and some paint, I needed something that was going to allow me to add texture without completely hiding what was already there. I wanted a layered look. So I opted to go with matte Mod Podge, as I knew I was going to be adding more paint later, and I wanted to make sure I had the same gloss base to work with. I experimented with applying it with a large mop brush first, but I really didn't like the way it looked since it was coming out too consistent. I finally settled on a small round brush to apply it. Using a smaller footprint would certainly take me longer, but it allowed me more control of how thin and thick I could apply it, and by using the tip and the sides of the brush, allowed for a more inconsistent look, which was perfect. Once everything was covered, I went over what I applied with a hairdryer. Now I did this for two reasons. The first reason is I've gotten some really neat looking casted metal looks before by applying spray Mod Podge first, followed by Plasti Dip, and then going to town on it with my heat gun. But for this, I wanted something a little more subtle. Now, by using the hairdryer on both the hot settings and the cooler setting, it did let me bubble up some of the Mod Podge without really ruining the layers underneath. The second reason for using the hairdryer? I'm impatient, and I wanted to make sure that this was actually going to work. Once the first layer was dry enough, I added a second, more sporadic coat of Mod Podge. There were a few spots that I thought just needed a little bit more character, and while the saying goes, sometimes less is more, in this instance, more was more. Also, Mod Podge, even when you put it on thick, has a tendency of flattening out, and I wanted to make sure I was accounting for that. Now, when I was adding this extra layer of texture, I was also trying to be very mindful of what it was going to look like when I added a little bit more paint, and ultimately, what the finish was going to do when I added weathering down the road. And of course, after getting the second coat of Mod Podge on, I used the hairdryer, because again, for no other reason, I was being impatient. Something I want to mention about the paint color itself, it's not a solid bronze. I know it kind of sort of looks like it on the video. It's actually a mixture of iridescent rich bronze, burnt umber, and raw umber all mixed together. I tried to mix the second coat of paint a little differently than the first batch I used because I wanted to have a very subtle variance in the color. Now, one happy accident that I found with doing it this way was the color was a lot brighter when I covered the sections that I went heavy with the Mod Podge on, because obviously the original base color I used was a Mars Black. Now, I applied this all with a large mop brush, not watered down, and I made sure I was stippling more than just brushing it on. I also used a rounded filbert brush to get in a couple little more inconsistent sections. Once the paint had dried, I took a large mop brush and just hit it a little bit more with some iridescent rich bronze just to shine it up just a little bit more. Now that is the texture that I really wanted. Granted, now I have to go back and write down everything that I did to make sure I repeat the same exact steps for every other piece that's going to be that color. But ultimately, that's what I had in mind. So again, there are going to be those times where what you had in mind isn't exactly going to work out the way you wanted them to, and that's completely okay. That's what makes us all better makers. It's making those mistakes and, most importantly, learning from them. Now remember, when those mistakes happen, it's going to be frustrating as anything. So you're allowed to get frustrated. You're allowed to pitch a fit. If it means that you got to throw yourself down on the floor and act like a 2-year-old who didn't get their candy bar at the grocery store, do it. You're in your shop. No one sees you doing it. And you know, I mean, don't do it in public, but if you're in your shop, it's okay. Swear. I'm fairly certain I made a number of new swear words when I was complaining about Bruce. You know, throw stuff, throw foam. You won't break anything. And, you know, as far as breaking things go, don't break what you're currently working on because that doesn't solve the problem. But get all that frustration out of your system. And then once it's out of your system, start working the problem. Now, in my experience, working a problem always starts with really truly identifying what the problem is. And what I mean by that is, you know, just an example for this, my problem wasn't the fact that I didn't have texture, because I did. It wasn't that it wasn't really enough. It wasn't even that. It was the fact that I did what I always did. I put plasti dip and paint on it, and I wasn't happy with it. I didn't want to settle. I wanted more layers. I wanted a different look. So therefore, my problem was I wasn't happy with what I wanted. How do I go about fixing it? Now, that's a big, huge, overwhelming thing. So I broke it down to a smaller section. So what can I use to add texture? Well, that's easy enough. Mod Podge. That's 2 problems solved already. Man, I'm on a roll. Third part. How do I put it on? Well, genius, it's Mod Podge. You use a brush. But I think you get what I'm getting at. Break it down into smaller sections and just work those problems. Solve one problem after the other, after the other, after the other. Because ultimately, that's what making really truly is. It's just problem solving. Whether you're trying to solve the problem of how do you build a giant suit of armor and attach it to your body, down to how do you solve the problem of the texture that you did wasn't the way you wanted it to be, so how do you fix it? Again, it's just problem solving. See, you can learn something by watching The Martian. He wasn't wrong. However, there are also going to be those times where you're not going to be able to come up with a solution and you're going to have to start over. And starting over is okay. Now, before you get to that point and decide to pull the trigger on starting over, make sure that you have exhausted all other options and all other possibilities before you do that. You don't want to have wasted all that time, effort, and material when maybe you just needed to take a day or two away from the project and come back to it to look at it from a different angle. But ultimately, there are going to be those times where you have to start over, and starting over is okay. It was very serendipitous. I love that word. This weekend when I was working on this texture, because I came across a quote online, and I really wish I knew who said it. And if you guys happen to know out there who did say it, let me know so I can obviously give them credit for it. But the post that they had made was something along the lines of starting over is never starting from scratch. Starting over is always starting from a place of more experience. And that really resonated with me after I pitched my fit like a 2-year-old in a grocery store, because I'm fairly certain I probably did that. But it really did. It really resonated with me, and it really made me realize that, you know, I know a lot of us go through this where things don't exactly look the way we want them to, or it didn't come out the way we wanted it to, or we have to take all those extra steps to fix something, and it can be frustrating. So if anything, I wanted to remind you that you're not alone, and by all means, you can find those solutions. Just remember one thing. Before you're a maker, you're a human. You're allowed to make mistakes. I'm fairly certain that's written down somewhere. So again, thanks for checking out my update on Bruce, and hopefully I gave you some food for thought during those times where things don't go exactly the way you want them to. As always, be inspired, make, create, and above all else, have a good time doing it. We'll catch you next time. I don't like it. I don't like...